Welcome to White Belt MMA, where you learn as we learn. What an exhausting weekend of MMA action. 2 Bellator cards, LFA card, first ESPN card for the UFC. You got Cage Fury Fighting Championships and Cage Warriors on Fight Pass. Not even gonna lie, like I watched those or had time to watch those. Hopefully I'll catch up with those later in the week, but with all that being said, honestly, I feel like I'm a little disappointed after all these fights. I don't know about you, but...
Not everybody disappointed, though.
Yeah.
There was, first of all, a number of dubs among the many people who did that. Those were mostly kind of decisions, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. We have to go through kind of play by play to check that out. But at least 3 finishes I could think of. One of those finishes, the Cain Velasquez and the Ngannou one, is questionable. We'll get to that later because that's that heavyweight bad boy.
Yeah.
But the Brazilian boy, what's his name?
Vicente. Luque. I don't know if it's Luke or Luque.
And Bam Bam
Barberena.
Yeah. That fight
tough.
ended in a finish.
Yeah.
And then you could call it a conflict of interest if you want, but I will debate you on that matter too. My teacher or professor or profe or maestre, Kron Gracie, won his debut in the UFC. He's actually had a 2-year layoff since his last fight, and actually within those 2 years is when I've been training with him. It's for the past 1.5 years I've been doing jiu-jitsu with him, and then
did you know that he was fighting MMA before you got into his
100%.
Yeah.
This is not like a mysterious chicken or egg question. This is not an accident that I ended up in his gym. I was living up in Central California training 3 months in BJJ under a Charles Gracie affiliate before I came to move back to LA. And when I moved back to LA, I said I want to be in that Hickson Gracie GOAT founders lineage.
Yeah.
And I want to learn that practical, like that theory made into practice. A fighter and a teacher who's also a fighter and who's an active fighter. So he was fighting in Ryzen at the time when I knew about him. He had his 4 fights and he spaced them out in a very healthy manner, once a year, seemingly always in December.
Healthy or about that money, contract disputes and whatnot, but we'll see.
Yeah, you could say it's a little bit of both, but he's been working on his striking a lot. As you saw, he caught Alex Caceres, who's he's an everything guy, but mainly a kickboxer, and he caught him with a nice left.
I think it was a 1-2 as well.
Yeah, it was strong. It rocked him a little bit. It didn't knock him down to the ground, but it made him stumble a little bit.
I mean, let's be perfectly clear. It wasn't the most technical 1-2, but it was a 1-2. He hit him with it.
Well, it set up the performance of the night.
True.
Which once he got his back, and I actually might have to look at that footage again because I don't know how he got his back, but once he got his back, that was all she wrote.
It was incredible, and I think that Kron, I don't know if he can do this with higher competition. I mean, obviously they probably gave him a tailor-made fight, you could even say, with a kickboxer. That's that classic, grappler versus striker matchup. But I don't know how he does against some of the better wrestlers in the division. I'd love to see it. I don't even know if what are they gonna do? They're gonna put him against a top 10 guy right away, or are they gonna give him? Who do you think they're gonna give him?
They have to. I think off the screen we're talking about someone who makes for an interesting stylistic matchup. Not yet that tough kind of wrestling takedown D that you're talking about, but someone who's also a BJJ expert, but in a different world, in the leg locking world, who has a similar kind of record and is in the UFC and has had trouble getting guys willing to fight him. He seems to be Ryan Hall, who recently
the wizard
leg locked the previously never tapping BJ Penn.
The legend, put him down. I love that fight. I want that fight in Brazil at UFC 237.
Oh man,
with the Diaz brothers. Throw the Diaz brothers on the card with Connor, man, and Anderson.
Well, Nick doesn't want to fight anymore, and if he doesn't want to fight, I don't want to see him fight.
Yeah.
If Nate's down to run it back with Connor, of course, I'd love to see that trilogy. That trilogy, to me, it ends on a tie, and you say, the tie is always like kissing your sibling.
Yeah.
So it's not a bad thing, but it's not a great thing.
I'd love it to be the inaugural 165 fight, because that would be a great way to introduce it, because Connor complained that it should have been at 155, 170 was too big. Let's just do it at 165 and get that division started, because you know what? There's way too much talent in 155 and 170. They need to split it up into 3 different.
Would you give him a belt?
No, I think you can just have it as a 165 fight, and then afterwards, why don't they just copy that awesome Bellator format of a Grand Prix
tournament,
and just grab some 170 guys, grab some 155 guys, and really have them throw down. And that'd be, you know, we can even talk about this on another podcast, but where we decide who should be in that tournament.
Kevin Lee.
Oh, let's not get into the whole
Rafael
thing.
Dos Anjos.
Yeah, of course. Plenty
Cowboy
of guys.
Cerrone.
Plenty of guys.
There are tons of names
that would fit in that in between. But yeah, back to the UFC in Phoenix, man. Honestly, I felt like that was the people's main event. Everyone talked about Ngannou Velasquez, and obviously that disappointed, and that was down to my overall disappointment for the weekend. That like really.
But why are you disappointed? I want to push you back on that. That was a second time that Francis Ngannou has TKO'd someone who is great at wrestling on paper and in action, and then who has kind of, maybe you'd say, medium level striking.
Yeah. Well, here's my thing, and there was a bunch of videos on Twitter and whatnot that showed Velasquez's training where he didn't look as sharp, and there was one where I think he slipped, and everyone thought that he had like a knee injury that flared up there. There's all this stuff going around that's saying that Kane had a buckled knee, and that's why he went down in the fight, and it wasn't really a finish. But I saw some highlights and some clips where he definitely got rocked by an uppercut by Ngannou. But I was disappointed because Kane is so-called heavyweight GOAT, and he goes into this fight, and everyone's waiting for 2 years for him to come back from so many surgeries, the bone spurs, the back problems, and now he comes in, he fights for 30 seconds, and he's gone. I don't know. I felt that.
I never forget two things. One, it seems to be a false dichotomy a lot of people are setting up, or a false binary, and they're saying either there was a knee slip due to these former injuries, or Ngannou knocked him out. I don't think it's an either or. I think it could be both. There's no reason. These things aren't mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
It could be the case. Remember, the second thing I was going to mention is that Ngannou, on whatever power meter check for punches, which reminds me of like the power meter from Dragon Ball Z when they used to have.
I don't know how accurate
tournaments.
those things are, man.
But
people be throwing crazy.
He knocked that out of the record. The closest, if I recall, is something like 700 or 800, and he got like 1200 on whatever that's measuring in. So the impact from his uppercut that you just mentioned could wobble through Kane's body and reactivate an injury that he thought was healed, and maybe that injury was 90%, but it took it back down.
I wouldn't go that far, but I would, I could see some of your points there. I could see it. But for me, I don't know, it just didn't live up to it. And I can kind of say a lot of fights didn't live up to expectation this weekend. And it wasn't just the UFC stuff. It was, Bellator had a really bad weekend. For so many reasons. Let me tell you why.
Why? Yeah. I liked the fight that I watched with you with Roy Big Country Nelson versus Mirko Krokop.
Oh, that was a great fight. Great fight. I'm sad there wasn't a finish. That was a great fight.
Yeah.
But MVP versus Daly was the most anticipated fight in Bellator history. I mean, at Twitter, everything was on fire for MVP versus Daly. They wanted to see that striking matchup. They wanted to see two guys really high level going at it. And they were just like scared of each other. I don't know if it was...
MVP wasn't scared. MVP was a smooth criminal in there. He was a smooth... His whole style is that point karate, point taekwondo.
He's got that karate stance.
Touch you, walk away. Yeah. Touch you, walk away. 1-2 combo, get away. 1, go away. 1, go away. Yeah. So he was just tapping him, touching him. And there were a couple times where Daly was actually showing signs of a flurry. This wasn't the snooze fest that was Ngannou Lewis.
No,
of course there were some real blows being thrown. But the big thing, the elephant in the room, the big hypocrisy was that, and maybe we're calling it hypocrisy, but maybe for him it's brilliance in fight IQ or fight EQ and fooling the whole world, because he was criticizing John Fitch, even booing John Fitch, and speaking to Morrow and the other announcers like Big John McCarthy during his fight with John Fitch, because he was grapple fucking them, as they say. But now he was trying to do that to MVP when we were expecting basically either like an unwritten agreement or a formal agreement to have a kickboxing match. But this was an MMA match, and what he did was fully legit. It's just hypocritical.
I think a lot of this has to do with I don't know if we would have saw the same fight if there wasn't $1 million on the line. With Bellator
From 50
having
Cent?
from 50 Cent,
Yeah.
with Bellator having all this money on the line, all this like accolades on the line, I think that they fight in this very like careful way. You're not going to get a crazy brawl because you know what? Why would you throw that money away? If you got that opportunity, you're going to fight in the most like strategic way possible. And Daly maybe just went through a full wrestling camp and said, "I'm going to take this guy down." And to be honest, how bad does MVP's wrestling have to be if it's getting taken down by Daly all day?
You know, I saw some people commenting like that on Twitter, you know, namely the great Ben Askren and others like that. What I would say to contend with that point is Paul Daly, people view him as a brawler, but he is a veteran of the MMA sport.
I think he's got 30 knockouts and no submissions.
And 40 wins, though. He's 40 wins.
I know, but he's a knockout.
And he does have those, 2 submissions to strikes. So that counts.
Oh, come on.
Submission
to strike.
Shit counts.
Oh, come on.
But what I was going to say is, I don't think you spend this much time with this many fights in MMA and you don't know how to wrestle. So I feel like
he didn't technically look that good with his wrestling.
Maybe he's been using this as a trump card. And maybe he's not the greatest wrestler on earth.
I just think his techniques for his single leg and double leg were just not great.
This to me, this calls to mind, people were critical of Al Yaquinta when he was fighting 5 rounds on basically no notice with Khabib, who's the champion at 155, and who people who train with him say he walks around at 205. He survived 5 rounds when Conor couldn't do that. And then he goes on to beat Kevin Lee, who Kevin Lee said that he would ragdoll Khabib.
Oh, I think...
And this rings to me that, like, styles make fights.
Of course.
It's not necessarily true that, you know, Yaquinta is bad because he was beaten the whole time. And it's not true that Paul Daly's grappling is bad. It might be MVP's D is great.
No, I think that Yaquinta is, like, probably the toughest fight for Khabib in his whole career so far. And I don't think you can compare the two.
More than Chandler, who got a clean hit. Or not Chandler, what's his name? Michael Johnson. Who got a clean hit on him?
No, I think that was an easy fight for Khabib. I think the only guy who had a really tough time, and he maybe lost a couple rounds to, was Al. I mean, he definitely won that fight, but Al gave him a huge fight. I don't think you can compare the two right there. But you know, that wasn't, honestly, yes, I was disappointed in that fight, but I think a lot of fights were disappointing for Bellator. I feel like there's like a few little changes they can make that could make things more interesting or could make things work better. And one of those was that I feel like they should have combined the last 2 events. They had an event on Friday night and an event on Saturday night, both at the same arena. I think it's the Mohegan Sun, the Indian tribe, and Connecticut, right? So they could have just combined those into one event and it would have been stacked. It would have had MVP Daly, it would have had Karatanov and Mitrione, both same night, would have been great. And then, you know, it would be less of a sting. Like when you watch the Mitrione versus Karatanov fight, which ended on one nut kick, and that was the end of the fight, and he couldn't continue. And then you got like the MVP Daly situation, which we already discussed, was a little disappointing. I don't know. I feel like Bellator has like so many opportunities to be great and to really surpass even UFC because they're doing. Scott Coker is very good at booking great fights. He's great at matchmaking, and that's something I think he might be even better at than Sean Shelby and Dana White and all those guys that over at McMaynard.
Well, fighting in this sense, full fighting, you know, even though there's these ancient pancreationist roots, is still a young sport in the contemporary sense. And these are all fledgling organizations. UFC, the most established, Bellator, far less established, but they're growing. These are the growing pains, man. But we don't have that perfect organization
yet. Scott Coker might
I'm still looking for that bare knuckle, no time limits, no weight limits, raw, absolute
open
best
weight
versus the best,
no, I get
excellent
you.
versus
but
excellent.
Scott Coker has been around for a while. He was the head of Strikeforce. You know, he was around longer than Dana almost. You know, like around the business. You know. Yeah. And I mean, maybe that's not exactly true, but I don't know the exact details. But what I'm saying is
fact check them, fam.
Fact check, exactly. It's fact check us for sure. But I think that the way they've been making their fights has been a little bit strange. Like, they've been bringing their prospects along a little too quickly, and that happened on Friday night with Mike Kimball being on the main card. And that dude is a savage. That's his nickname, Mike the Savage Kimball. He knocks people out in the first round. He's a fucking monster. Huge reach and height for his division at 135.
Prospect MVP got that dub though against Daly, like we were just talking about.
Sure, but the thing is though, I think maybe it's too early to rush him into a main card slot against a tough guy, BJJ guy, where he probably himself, he's like, I think he's a blue belt in Connecticut, and you know what, he was solid, but he definitely got caught. And I think that same thing happened with Pico. You know, you rush him into a tough fight. Corrales was a tough fight a month back, and then you get the hype train that gets stopped. And I appreciate.
Yeah, what's the alternative? Baby them?
Yeah, give them shitty
Like
fights.
boxing?
You can complain either way. You can complain that they're rushing them.
Just give them little clay pigeons to shoot with shotguns.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
True. And
Like,
Pico's
this is
asking
combat.
for it. Pico's a
This is
different
combat
situation.
sports.
Pico's asking for the toughest guys all the time. But you run into these problems when you're building stars. Like the UFC's trying to build stars, Bellator's trying to build stars, something that's marketable that brings audiences in. And when you see a young star get knocked out, you start caring less. I don't know if the hype for Pico's next fight is going to be there as it was for the Corrales fight. I don't know if Mike Kimball, per se, is going to have the hype for his next fight. We'll have to see.
He only has 2 losses, so I think Pico's going to come back. And for me, he's got the requisite kind of skill set. If you looked at him like he was a video game character, if somebody else was in control, you know what I'm saying? Joe Rogan or Brendan Schaub, one of them, they were talking to each other and they said, basically, he just needs to obey TJ Dillashaw. If he just follows the route of TJ Dillashaw, and they're in the same camp with Calistetta in that garage, and then they've got the
I don't know if
training
he's
lab.
doing Dwayne Bang, though. I don't know if
He's not doing that.
I think he's just with Freddie Roach and doing boxing. I don't know if he's doing that Muay Thai and that.
He's not doing the Muay Thai, but he doesn't need to necessarily accept, you know, that type of Muay Thai.
That boss Rutan style?
I mean, just style of fighting and the training style, you know, about being more methodical. And as you were saying, as Paul Daly went to his calculated tech, like what I was saying, his fight IQ and EQ is in the sense of being a calculated defeater of opponents rather than someone who's just searching for a viral highlight reel that's going to get you guaranteed CTE and losses on your record,
that's
making it a 50-50 fight as opposed to a technical fight.
Yeah, I mean,
where you have the advantage.
That's what I said about Luque in his fight, and it's like very similar to Pico, where he doesn't defend and he's just gonna wear every shot, you know. And that's like a lot of problem with fighters that are really talented. They're gonna fucking get wrecked,
especially when they win.
Yeah.
At least Pico lost, so he could learn from that. Luque won, so he might not change his strategy.
Yeah, that's true. I mean,
and it was a last-second one, man.
I think actually I saw the scorecards. Someone posted the scorecards after the fight for Luque and Barberena, and it was, I think they had Brian winning the fight up to the point. I think they had 10-9.
Honestly,
10-9.
if you're, it depends on your value. If your value is sheer like strikes landed, the boy was just tapping him. At one point, he was just like tap, tap, tap. Let me just tap you from different angles. And you could say from a kind of negative perspective that he was just trying to score strikes landed. Yeah. But I secretly think he was trying to get him used to and accustomed to these light taps, and then he was searching for an opening to get a big one.
Right. I think he was just trying to get weird on him. I think he was just trying to, like, you know, just throw him off because, you know, he's so technical and good that he probably trains with these really technical guys. And you're running into a guy that's awkward, kind of throwing weird shit at you. You're not ready for it. But at the same time, I think
RDA Tony Ferguson.
But Tony's the weirdest. You don't want to have the weird conversation with Tony. You can't. He's the highest ranking on the weird list.
Pound for pound, weirdest.
Pound for pound, weirdest is definitely Tony Ferguson.
And we mean that in the most beautiful way
possible.
Beautiful,
love you, Tony.
Tony Ferguson, please do not darce us.
Exactly. It just didn't live up to Israel and Anderson. MVP Daly just didn't live up to that. You know, like I felt satisfied with Israel and Anderson.
Yeah, that was the pinnacle of the striking arts and sciences within MMA. I haven't watched enough kickboxing and Muay Thai fights to say about what the striking arts and sciences would be like there. But at least as it pertains to MMA, that was some of the best striking I've ever seen, because you had 2 counter strikers who were cautiously striking each other. Most of them were lighter taps, but there were some strong blows too, and they went for it. They went for some head kicks. They went from some strong rights and even some hooks. But at the same time, Anderson Silva was trying to bait Israel more, and Israel was at some points dancing around the man who dances around other people. And that's no knock on Anderson, because he could still beat a lot of people in the top 10 and a ton of people all over the world at age 43, about to be 44.
No, he's a legend.
Israel, young buck around age 30, around our age, is seeming to be
I don't
one
like
of
how
the
you put
stars
my
of
age
that.
out there in the world, but go ahead. Continue your point.
A plus or minus. It could be a margin
there
of
you
5
go.
years, 10 years, 30
please,
years.
take note of that.
I'm speaking
for sure.
loosely.
Yeah.
But that type of striking is rarely seen, and I just appreciate it. You know, as a fan, I would have liked to see it go more rounds. I did hear Israel comment that his side was willing to take it
5
on
rounds.
short notice, 5 rounds.
Right.
You know, the sad occurrence with Robert Whitaker and
Makes total sense.
his bowels
Right.
caving in.
Shit, man, that was crazy.
But Silva's camp was not ready to go. That they
Of
trained
course,
for 3,
42
and
years old,
you know,
yeah.
fairness, justice wise,
Yeah.
I understand that. But yeah, man. In conclusion, white belt MMA. We out here to talk about as many different combat sports as we pay attention to.
There's gonna be more K1 stuff, more
Lafay,
Lafay.
some headbutting.
We're gonna be all
bare
over the
knuckle
place. Shout out to
brawling.
Kaposa for making the list of all the events. We're gonna be all up on it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
That service.
And thank y'all for listening.